So welcome to today's Michigan Alliance for Families Lunchtime IEP Learning webinar. Our series this year is around the topic of transition, and our presenter today is Angela Martin from the Developmental Disabilities Institute at Wayne State University. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us just before you get started, Angela, can you just tell us a little bit about the Developmental Institute at Wayne State University in case people aren't familiar?
Sure, absolutely. Yes. As Emily said, I work at the Developmental Disabilities Institute at Wayne State University. We are Michigan's Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We're a statewide organization that is hosted at Wayne State University, and we have two key statewide partners. We are a federally created entity, and our statewide partners might also be people might be aware of them as well. And just mention them. That's the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council and the Michigan Protection and Advocacy Services. And together, the three of us are what's considered the statewide network of administration intellectual and developmental disability programs in the state of Michigan. And our focus as part of the partnership is to provide education, pre-service education to people that would work in the field or support people with disabilities, community training and education, which is training to the community, families, people with disabilities, research, and that includes research to advance the field, and also information and dissemination, and that means sharing what we know in terms of the field and our knowledge and our research to help bring greater awareness to the community, the disability community in Michigan. So that in a nutshell is the Developmental Disabilities Institute. I'd also like to mention one other entity that I'm kind of here presenting on behalf of, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, is Michigan Partners for Freedom, and that is a grassroots effort that is actually housed at the ARC Michigan, but is really a statewide grassroots movement to advance self-determination, and that's what I hope to share with you today, is some information about self-determination. So Emily, can I have you advance the next slide, please? So self-determination, people have probably heard that word in at different points in their own life or their son or daughter's life. And these are some of the words. I think a word cloud is sometimes helpful in explaining what it includes and what it might mean. It means arranging supports based on your individual need, using person-centered planning. If some of you were part of last week's webinar on person-centered planning and heard Sally Burton-Hoyle speak, I'm sure she talked about the connection of how person-centered planning is the basis for planning for one's own life. And then self-determination is the bigger picture around it, which includes personal choice, meaningful life, self-direction, directing the supports to really reflect the individual's needs, and it's a full expression of the person-centered planning process. Next slide, please. So when we talk about person-centered planning, when we're talking about self-determination, we're moving away from the old way of doing business and supporting people with disabilities, and really moving the system in a totally different direction. And this has been happening for the last several decades. But to do this, we really needed to have a rationale for what was the basis of this movement. So in the 90s, Michigan was one of a few states that had the opportunity to really organize how it would shift its system away from a care model of supports or a medical model of supports to a person-directed, person-centered model of supporting people with disabilities. And from that, we in Michigan had the opportunity to pilot several projects across the state, and from that we have developed principles that really honor what we're trying to accomplish in the lives of people with disabilities. And those principles, there's 4 recognized principles by the state, but I'm going to share with you a 5th one that really is at the bequest of self-advocates to really advance the movement even farther. But they're the principles of freedom, authority, support, responsibility. I'm going to come back to each one of them. The 5th principle that the self-advocacy movement really wanted to include is confirmation. So freedom means the opportunity to choose where and whom you want to live with, as well as how you want to organize your supports. And they're based on your individual needs of what you feel is best for you, and chosen with the assistance of people that know you and care about you. Some people always ask, what if they can't fully express, or it's only a few people understand or can interpret for that individual? Well, that's why we want people around them in the planning process and connected to them to help make sure that the system fully realizes what that individual is trying to share or trying to communicate. The second principle is authority, where these are public dollars that we are using to provide supports to people with disabilities. And with that, you have some decision-making over what those dollars are spent on. That the system is not telling you that these are the things you can have, and you can, these are the only things you can have, and we think these are the best things for you to make your life meaningful. When in fact, that is not how we want the system to change. So the second piece is support, and that means using the support to, or using the dollars to arrange the supports that are unique to the individual. So setting up a person's support so that they reflect how they want when they want their services delivered, where they want their services delivered, how they want their services delivered. If somebody's a morning person and they don't necessarily have, the ability, they don't want to get up in the morning and they're not going to get an early start, then for sure that we want support to come into their life in the afternoon when they might go to work then, or they might have their day starts later in the day. Responsibility is the 4th one, and that means because these are public dollars, we want to make sure that people are using them in the way that they are intended. Because they're tax dollars, they have to be used in a way that we need to be responsible for, but also that people need to be reported in a way that they are used in the way that they're intended to. Because they are tax dollars, and as tax dollars, we have an obligation to the individuals that contribute to these service dollars that we need to use them within the guidelines of both laws locally and statewide. The 4th one is confirmation, and when I mentioned that when we had the Robert Wood Johnson project in Michigan, and the Robert Wood Johnson project was 6 communities over several years here in Michigan. And we were not the only state, but many of the national self-advocacy movement called SAVE, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, came to many of the project partners that were operating these projects and said, listen, it's great that you're trying to shift the movement. We fully support that you're trying to shift the movement, but you need to recognize that we need to be involved in the movement change, the movement of change, and changing this human service system. And I particularly like this picture and the background of the word confirmation is that it doesn't, they're referencing Autism Speaks in this particular picture, that it doesn't speak for me. And I think that's really key, is that while all of us in the working field, family members, I'm also a family member, we need to support people with disabilities to tell us how we can best be of support to them and making the movement better for them, not deciding what the movement should look like for them. Next slide, please. So a good quality of life is the best way that we can describe what we're talking about when it comes to these principles and how does it work in a person's life, bringing it from the philosophical to the practical. And so we need to encourage folks to have the same, using supports to have the same life that others would have. That's truly the intention of human services, is that we're trying to provide people with some assistance or support so that they can have, you know, the same life outcomes. And in doing so, we're trying to help people to engage in those opportunities with their supports and services when it's necessary, to engage in a good quality of life. So what that means, and I'm going to point to the very picture in the upper left-hand corner, and meaningful relationships is the best expression of that. People who care about you and who care about who you care about and who care about you, and this can include family relationships, whether they're blood or non-blood relatives, friendships, connections with neighbors or a worship community, obviously coworkers if you're of working age, and that includes romantic relationships. People have, you know, aspirations of, you know, being, sharing their life with somebody. So helping people to build meaningful relationships. I point to the second picture in the upper right-hand corner, community memberships. When you're young, being a contributing member, a value member of communities is as important as when you're an adult. It might look a little different when you're younger, and that might mean that you are a member of a local Girl Scout or Boy Scout troop. It might mean that you're participating in a local sports association or accessing a local recreation center. Some of these carry forward when you get, you know, become an adult, and such as, you know, using a local recreation community park or library. But it could expand when you're an adult to being a member of the local civic group, or you know, participating in a local community organization. So being involved in the community and giving back to the community, and you might use your supports to do so. The next one is having a place of your own, and I point to that picture in the lower left-hand corner of that house, and that might look like your house, or it might be something different. The key is that it's a place that you call home, that you feel comfortable and safe in, that you control the front door, who comes in and provides you with supports. When those supports are provided, you're deciding that, and then how you're living. And it doesn't mean that you have to own the space where you're, you know, your name's on the mortgage, but it could mean, it does mean that you have some control over that, and that you have a legal connection to that support. So it might mean that you have a rental agreement, or it could mean that you own. And it could be a house, it could be an apartment, it could be sharing your space with somebody, but all of your choosing, and in a place that you feel comfortable and that you feel safe. The next one I would point to is employment and income generation. And you see this young man in the far lower right-hand corner working. And when you're earning income, it provides you with the opportunity to feel valued, obviously as a contributing member to the work world, but also that you have some self-worth, you have obviously some earning power. The advantage of having earned income is that you have greater control over your resources. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important, especially with this transition series, for families to understand that earning income is an okay thing, even if the person is receiving SSI. Sometimes that message is not always clarified, that you can still earn money and still receive SSI. That's really a separate topic, and I won't get into that too deeply, but we do want people to know that when they earn their own income, there are not the rules that are attached that are relegated by the Social Security system. And so it does provide you with freedom that Social Security does not, in terms of, you know, being able to participate in the community, you know, buy things the way you want or spend what you want on those. There's not rules when it's your earned income. The next one is a useful education, and you see this young man in the middle lower part of this PowerPoint slide, that, you know, he's participating alongside his classmates, using technology to be part of that classroom. And at a young point, you know, he might be receiving special education supports in the general ed classroom, and you know, Michigan is really unique in that if you remain eligible, you can receive special education services up to the age of 26. We are the only state that, you know, provides that. But that might not be for everyone. Not everyone is meant to be, you know, might not feel comfortable going to school for their full 26 years. They might want to pursue some other types of, maybe they want to be ready for work earlier. And I think that's really important when we're talking about transition, is that we're speaking of this as in terms of a long-term process. So it's talking about future education beyond the traditional system, maybe a post-secondary or adult education or some other type of education. And the last one I point to in terms of a good quality of life, and I think this picture pretty much represents it, is the middle picture of the young girl standing on top of the yellow wheelchair. And if you were a parent, you'd probably, you know, the gut reaction would be to sit down in the chair. And we have to remember that people with disabilities need to be supported to have greater control over their lives. And that's really key to self-determination, because a lot of our learning is people growing from young people to adults is having that experience of life, a direct experience, where many of us learn through trial and error. And sometimes it takes us several attempts to make it a success. But it's that learning process and learning about ourselves that we do need to experience. So it's not it should not be that the system takes away that ability or that opportunity for people with disabilities, but it can't be seen as you know, the system tries to care for people when that can limit their ability to feel, experience life or experience risk, or try to control one's experience of just life in general. So we want to help people to have the opportunity to make some decisions so that when they're an adult, they're feeling more comfortable, they've had some opportunities to try that out, and so it gives them more confidence in making more adult decisions when they turn 18 or when they become an adult. Next slide, please. This is a slide from a project in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, excuse me, their Department of Education. I think it's a really neat, useful tool that some of you may or may not be familiar with. In it, it's called the I'm Determined project. They have several materials, but some of the things that I think that are useful in this, and I'm going to ask Emily to open the website so I can just kind of walk you through it and show you what's there. It's a series of questions based on age range, which I think is helpful when you are, and mostly parents are on this call, to see kind of what self-determination means at certain life stages. So when you get to this website and you kind of like hover over one of the pictures, so if you want to, Emily, hover over the 10 to 12 age young man, he's tell you exactly where to hover over. If you go to the bottom where the age box is, it'll open up and expand. Maybe try another box, Emily, on the 12 to 14 if it's not expanding. Well, forgive me. I don't want to spend I don't want to hold the time up here. I apologize that it's not working, and I'm kind of directing controls from the extension here. But when you go to this website, we'll make this website available to you so you can access it. It gives you questions like, for the young man who is 10 to 12, it would suggest questions like helping the young person discover or know what their disability is, to start to learn about who can help them in school and participate in their meeting. Fast forward a couple of years, when they're 14 or 15, does that person learning to you know, actually direct their IP? Are they leading the IP? Do they know who's part of their circle of support? Fast forward a little bit more, to the age range of 16 to 17, and that might help them to start to recognize what are some of the barriers that they might be experiencing and how can they, find solutions. Also, what are some of their early rights and responsibilities as adults? When we're talking about self-determination, we're talking about it for people that are of adult age. I mean, the whole word is self and determine. It presumes an adult responsibility. So as parents that are participating on this webinar, for many of you, okay, thank you, Emily, I apologize, it didn't work there. So you can see if you hover over, it gives you some examples, and as you move through the life skills or the life stages, it offers opportunities to think about the questions in those chronological ages, so that would be a typically developing opportunity to help you think about self-determination as you're preparing that young person for the future. And as I said, yes?
For the record, this website is not very good in a Chrome browser. It's working in IE. So
okay, okay. Well, that's interesting because I'm using it in Chrome. It might be the version, but let's go to IE just for sake. Thank you very much. So when we're talking about people, young people, you're really helping them to prepare for adulthood and taking on more adult experiences. You've seen that 15 to 16-year-old frame box there. They're actually talking about healthcare, and that's something I really have a personal interest in helping people who have health-related conditions really think about their transition to adult-related supports or involvement with adult supports, because healthcare does change quite a bit when you become a legal adult. So that's a tool that you could use. They have some other resources as well. I just think it's a really helpful set of questions for families to think about. Thank you, Emily. So returning to the slides, in Michigan, we have been, as I said, doing much of this for several years. We've been practicing and supporting self-determination for several years. We were the first state to have a policy and practice guideline adopted to our State Department of Community Health contract, which means that it's something that's to be adhered to by people that provide community mental health supports. Having said that, other states are not as far along in the process as Michigan is. And so recently, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known in the acronym in this slide as CMS, came back and tried to have states get a better national interpretation of what we're talking about when we mean community-based supports. So what that means, in the far left-hand part of this slide, you see the young man holding the sign up that says "Our Homes, Not Nursing Homes." It's a place where they have full access to the community. And the best way to say that is the same place where people that don't receive supports would access. That's what we're talking about when we say where should self-determination happen, and it's in the community. The second one is that people decide where they live from choices that are given. Obviously, we can't all live wherever we want. I mean, I'd love to live on a beach, especially given this winter, more often than not, but I have some choices that I balanced out in terms of my job and my family, and I choose to live here in Michigan in a house. So there are parameters with all choices, but making sure that we have choices that are freely given to people so that they're really having informed information so that they can choose the places they want to live, and then also who provides the supports for those places that they're choosing to live. That we also provide people with the right of privacy, respect, and dignity, and that they should not be coerced or pressured. And that also means that they should not experience any kind of physical or mechanical or chemical restraint, be free from restraint. And in Michigan, we don't allow that in terms of community mental health support, that if you're receiving supports in the community, that the state does not allow its providers to do that. But when you're living with people, sharing space, that you still have those rights of privacy, personal space, and dignity and respect. And then the last one is to have greater control and independence in making life choices. That means how you spend your days, who you spend your time with, you know, what type of career you might pursue. Really thinking to use the supports using supports to provide assistance to those life choices. And I make a reference in the bottom of this slide. There is a brief newsletter article that I'm going to show you where the newsletters are at if you are interested as well, to get the full article that's associated with this, this graphic. Next slide. So in supporting self-determination, we've really redesigned how we provide us the connection of planning to service to provision of service. And this really starts with people developing a circle of support. So if you are looking at this slide, in the top right bullseye of the three people, that really is bringing people together to help who care about you, who you choose to have in your life, come together and help you think about what you can do in your future. And we discussed that through the person-centered planning process. In Michigan, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but this is the way that we plan for supports. So from that person-centered planning process, and the person-centered planning process is different than the IEP in that it doesn't solely talk about, in the IEP you talk about the education services. In the person-centered planning, you might talk about education, you might talk about medical, you might talk about legal, you might talk about a whole variety of things. We don't only talk about mental health supports, or we talk about the beyond the picture of service systems, the bigger picture. And from that, we do develop, and this is the legal document, what is called an individual plan of service. And that's the agreement for which the community mental health system will pay for services in support of that person-centered plan. When the system develops an individual plan of service, they also develop a budget, and that's basically the individual plan of service is a description of the services, the actual naming of the services, and the amount or how often they'll be delivered. The budget, individual budget, is a financial document that says this is how much those services are going to cost. So that funding comes from the community mental health system. And the way that we fund mental health in our state, and when I say mental health, that's what it's called, but it includes individual services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But that funding comes from Medicaid primarily. There are also some general fund money that's obviously from the local community or from state funds. And those dollars are then authorized to provide support to that budget. Some people might use a supports coordinator or case manager to help organize and manage and oversee that assistance and those services. They might also use a fiscal intermediary, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about both of those supports in just a moment. Next slide, please. So as I said, Michigan has, in its mental health code, the Michigan Mental Health Code is like the IEP rule or the special education rules book for the mental health system. It really is the document that says what the mental health code must and must not do. In our mental health code, we actually, for several decades now, have had person-centered planning as the chosen way that we plan for services and supports. And the planning process looks at the individual's needs and thinks about what he or she may want to be a part of, to how they want to be included in the community, and looks at what their individual preference, choices, and abilities are. It really is a personalized process. From that, if we go to the next slide, you might have one of the supports to help organize or implement that person-centered plan is somebody called an independent supports coordinator or supports broker. So there are two ways to receive supports coordination services or case management services in our state. You can receive them from somebody who works for the system, or you could contract with somebody who works outside the system to provide that service. It would be the same service. The only difference being is that that person works outside the system. And sometimes that provides a conflict-free arrangement. The role of supports coordination is always the same. It's to help plan, organize, or evaluate how things are going for that individual, and specifically to address and monitor what's been in the plan of service and that individual budget that supports that plan of service. So a supports coordinator might help somebody access programs, entitlement programs such as Social Security or Department of Human Services. They might identify community supports. They might not be system supports. They might connect them to something that honors or is an implementation opportunity for that plan of that person-centered plan. The person-centered planning process is, again, a general document that outlines what the person wants out of his or her life. The plan of service is the document that says what the mental health system will do to what services it will provide in support of that, and is monitored by a supports coordinator. And that individual budget, next slide please, is an individual amount allocated for those services and supports. It's controlled by the individual with assistance from the people that he or his circle of support or key people in his or her life. There's some key features of quality when we look at individual budgets that we want to kind of be cognizant of to make sure that there's a highest quality being delivered to each individual, that they're individually created, that there's one budget for supporting each individual person. The old medical way of doing business or care model was that we had people living in group situations, and that house would get a budget, and it wouldn't speak to the individual needs of any one person. It would only speak to a group need. And what would happen is that something happened, and there wouldn't be the right $1 was supporting one person and being pulled in a different direction. And it didn't meet the individual needs. So when problems arise or situations occur, it put people at risk. So when you individually create a budget, it's speaking to that person's direct needs. Funding is flexible, that it can be moved around between authorized lines, meaning authorized means that the lines or supports that have been approved by the system to be used upon. These are public dollars. We have to use them within the rules. There are state and federal rules relative to Medicaid and other funding sources. We don't get to spend them willy-nilly however we want. But we do have authority over expenditures, and that means the person decides who wants to deliver this, who they want to deliver the service, and when and how it's delivered, time of day, by which organization or person, and the actual details of the service delivery. The reason that we use these human service dollars is we're investing in people so that they can be part of our greater community, that human service dollar being used to help people with disabilities live in their community, be a part of it. But that means that the person can also have full access to community, and that means portability. So if they want to move house, say they have lived in the same house for 10 years and they decide that they want to move, that the supports that they're using are not going to dramatically change because they've decided to pick a new apartment or something. But it also means that they can choose other providers. That's portability works in two different ways. The way you get assistance with this is with the next, if we hit the next slide, Emily, is through a fiscal intermediary. Medicaid has a rule that it can't write checks directly to people to receive their supports, who receive their supports. It has what is called a third-party distribution rule. And so the way that we accomplish these practices and meet the rule is that we have a service called a fiscal intermediary service. And simply put, they're really places that are authorized by the mental health system to receive the services and make payments on behalf of the individual for the supports that they receive, which can include, you can stay on this slide, Emily, payroll services, which means they might be making checks out on behalf of the individual for their direct support staff. They might be making bill payments on that individual's behalf for his or her utilities or household expenses, but only with the individual's authorization. They might help them coordinate their benefits. If somebody's receiving home health dollars and wants to use those dollars to pay the same staff that they have for their mental health service dollars, that they'll coordinate that so there's a seamless payment to that direct support staff. They might help them negotiate contracts with their direct support staff or their service providers. They certainly provide a very key service of record keeping. Because these are federal dollars, they have to report it, how they're spent, who they're payments are sent to, when they're expended. So they provide that record keeping service. And they make sure that in doing so that we, as individuals that receive these Medicaid dollars, are adhering to rules of reporting and also in terms of documentation of eligibility and service delivery. So for instance, if somebody hires a direct support staff, by Medicaid law they have to receive certain training. That Fiscal Intermediary can maintain those records so that the individual doesn't have to worry about it. Next slide, please. So this is a flow chart that I think is kind of useful. It was created by the organization called TASH. They're a national organization really focused on supporting people with complex intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I think this really is helpful in explaining how this all, I'm a very visual person, this kind of explains out how these pieces all fit together. So if you want to start in the upper left-hand corner where it says government, just to kind of bring this all together, the government has fiscal dollars that it collects through taxes, and from that we make the decision that we're going to support people through human services to help them be a part of their community. So to doing that, we provide mental health services. And if you move to the center circle where it says individual and plan, it says with those dollars we're going to authorize supports to help you pay for employees, choose how you're going to live, what supports you're going to control. And with the assistance, what they call in this example, with the assistance of an independent broker, but we call it supports coordination or case management in Michigan. You're going to be able, and if you follow the middle dotted line with the cash flow, you can buy supports with those service dollars, either through funded services. You can purchase services through like an agreement or employ people to deliver those services, or you could buy those services in the community, and that would be generic services. Those expenses those purchases are made with the assistance of a fiscal intermediary. If you look at the angle there, who's making the payments to those individual service provisions that you're buying. So they're making the payments for those purchases on your behalf. All of this happens in the background or with the assistance of licensing at the state level, monitoring, advocacy groups, support groups. So this really kind of explains out how the system is all supposed to fall together when we talk about self-determination and individual funding of supports. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that you may have heard the word self-determination, but I do want to make a distinguishment between self-determination and self-direction. And Tom Nerney is really considered the grandfather of this movement. And this is a quote from Tom Nerney, and it says, as a result, self-direction measures the adequacy of the services, the person's control of the services, and the person's satisfaction with them. These are admirable steps in a new direction. Self-determination sees supports and public dollars as means to an end, not an end in of itself. Lives of high purpose require deeper foundation. And that, and that really gets back to the original principles that we're talking about: high quality of life, not just having some greater control over some services, because that in and of itself does not yield a high quality life outcome. Next slide, please. At the beginning of this webinar, I mentioned Michigan Partners for Freedom. And, oh, I'm sorry, it looks like this title there on the side got a little jumbled. But Michigan Partners for Freedom, as I mentioned earlier, is a statewide grassroots group that has been trying to advance and build demand for self-determination. We've been around. We will actually be 10 years old in this coming April. And through that, we've provided training, support, information dissemination, connected people to other resources across the state. But I wanted to point out 3 resources within Michigan Partners for Freedom that I would offer as resources to you going forward. If you hit enter, Emily, the first arrow will appear. The newsletters are, we have newsletters archived. We always have electronic newsletters quarterly. We have them all for as long as we've been doing them. They're as valid as some a couple years ago. I still go back and reference, but they're great materials for information. Next arrow, please. We also have, as you can see from the website, 3 DVDs that we have that are hosted on YouTube but posted at our website that give you some examples of what we mean by self-determination in terms of a video format. And enter again for the third arrow. We also have documentation, and when you go to our website, you'll see that sometimes we find that people looking for state documents, it's sometimes hard to find or access with relative ease on the state's website. So if there are state documents related to self-determination, we have them all posted on our website. So you can download them, read them at your leisure. There's some really good ones in terms of some question and answers and also some just fact sheets. But there's also the full-length documents that are some 20 pages. If you're looking for some if you're very familiar with self-determination, you might want the more technical documents. But if you're new to this idea, you might want to start with the fact sheets and maybe the Q&As is to get some background information. Our website, and I'm going to, just with a few minutes here, Emily, if you want to just show them on the website address, or can they receive that? It's really easy to remember. It's mifreedom.org. And if you scroll down just a little bit, Emily, those spots that I highlighted with the slide will show up. So you see that there's the materials there, the videos are there, and then there's some additional resources. Okay, I'm going to return to the slides. So just to wrap up and leave some time for some questions is that when we're talking about self-determination, it's really a movement towards citizenship, full participation, and high quality of life, meaningful community membership as well. And it's really a change from how we used to do business in the medical model, the care model of supports, moving away from where we controlled people, we isolated them, and we disrespected them. It's all about freedom, and it's about honoring people and respecting them as full citizens of our community. Next slide. So here's my contact information. I know you have copies of the slides that are available at the website. If you have specific questions, or I do want to also reference DDI has a series of videos that also are great tools called the Possibilities videos. Some of you have seen them. They're on our website. So there's some more materials that are of help to you as well, and to the young people that you share your lives with. So with that, I'm going to leave the last 10 minutes here to open up to questions if there are, or comments, and I'm going to turn it back over to Emily for that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for attending today's webinar. If you have follow-up questions, you can always contact Michigan Alliance for Families at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Our phone number is 1-800-552-4821. And I hope you will check out the rest of the webinars in this series.